countries, of course, the Gulf countries may need to import the fossil fuels instead of exporting. Another issue is the for environmental pollution. So for these 6 countries, fall in the top 25 countries of carbon dioxide emissions per capita and are preserved as the main actors blocking international climate change negotiations. So just 6% of the global population is living in the Gulf Countries Council or Cooperation, but the region is contributed to 2.4% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. So the third problem is which a result of these pollutions is the increasing of climate temperatures, which means increasing water demand, which also causes the Red Sea levels to increase or to rise. So the causes of these problems, what causes this problem is first of all, the rapid growth in populations for the last 3 decades. Gross domestic product also increase. The rapid urbanization, and the wasteful consumption of energy. So also the lack of energy management. We can see a lot of energy waste. I'm witnessing this around me and the countries. Also the lack of water, natural resources. We don't have pure water or fresh water natural resources. We just have the sea in the east and the sea in the west. Some people claim that the low prices of gas and electricity is also the low reason for that. The harsh environment is also a factor to contribute for this. Now we can see the variation of electricity consumption for Gulf countries. It can be shown that Saudi Arabia has a large consumption gigawatt hours. It reaches 200,000 gigawatt hour. And the rate of this increasing, the percentage rate, the annual percentage is highly increasing in this time between 2006 and 2010. It followed by United Arab Emirates and Kuwait, which also has a large annual increasing rate. Between this, the annual increasing rate might reach up to 10% sometimes here or more for Saudi Arabia. Another problem that faces Gulf countries is peak load. Peak load happens for a couple of hours during summer days or a couple of days during summer. The peak load put a huge load on electricity company for a short period of time. And we come here to the energy policy in Gulf countries. What is the energy policy in Gulf countries? How do the Gulf countries react with this severe problem that they have? So they either initiate regulations through ministries or organization or collaboration with expert countries, or they start a practical project to conserve the energy. We take an example like Saudi Arabia. They have a collaboration. They have a Ministry of Water and Electricity. Have collaborated with JICA, which is the Lebanese International Collaboration Agencies, and they agreed to take several steps, like increase the energy efficiencies in governmental, commercial, and industrial sectors. They agreed to have load management program during emergency, develop a price system for electricity and consumptions, train the energy managers in different working sectors, enhancing the energy auditing program in Kingdom Saudi Arabia, develop energy efficiency level program. And we also, Saudi Arabia, initiate the Saudi Standards Meteorology and Quality Organization, which is SASO. SASO contribute to the development of national economy through adopting suitable standards for goods and services or adopting quality standards for the products or for the systems sometimes. So what did SACO do? One of their effort is to initiate the energy efficiency cards for home and devices. So these cards will show you the device that whether it is efficient or not. The more stars you have, simply the more stars you have with the device, it means it's more efficient, less power consumptions. And they put this target year by year, increasing the stars. So increasing the stars. So the stars were before 3 or 4 stars, and now it reached now to 8 point, or the goal for this year, I think 2018 and 19, to reach 8.5 stars for the HVAC equipments. Here the details of the efficiency card. So for 7 stars, the energy efficiency, energy efficient ratio will reach 9, will range between 8.5 to 9.5, which is equivalent to the COB of 2.49 to 2.78. And for the spirit unit, it can reach the energy efficient ratio up to 11.5, which is exceeding the 3.37 COP. Also, we have a car efficiency card. This label will be hanged on the cars, so the customer will see or will recognize whether this economy fuel car or not. Will it reach to the tire also of the car, so the customer will see this label behind on the tire, so the customer will notice whether this is a tire efficient in terms of energy or in terms of slippery surface. Also, Saudi Arabia established Saudi Energy Efficiency Centers in 2010. The centers aims at rationalize the production and consumption of energy in order to increase efficiency in the kingdom and unifying effort in the field, whether governmental or non-governmental. Also, from the things that causes, as we mentioned before, that one of the reasons that have the shortage of power is low price. So Saudi Arabia recently, sadly, last year increases the gas price from 60 halala per liter to 130 halala per liter for the 91 gas, and for the 95 premium gas, increasing from 90 halala to 204 halala. Also, from the effort or the regulation that Saudi Arabia has did during the last year is the increasing of the tariff for electricity. So the kilowatt hour price increases from 5 cents per kilowatt hour to 80 cents per kilowatt hours, or so the customer who are paying 50 Saudi Riyal for 1,000 kilowatt hour per month, you will pay now 180 Saudi Riyal, and the rate is increasing. As you can see, they also develop this thermometer to let the customer think how much the new tariff will be. The Ministry of Electricity and Water in Kuwait also has an effort in in construction of green buildings, improve all codes related to energy conservation, prepaid system for electricity bill, smart operation for air conditioner lighting to reduce electric energy during peak hours, enhancing the use of fluorescent lights, energy conservation awareness campaign for public in shopping malls, schools, media campaign. Masdar City is a great effort in United Arab Emirates, which is founded in 2008 to be the Middle East largest exporter of renewable energy. It has invested around 2.7 billion in projects around the world. It has a lot of international efforts. Also, for the inlet effort, they have like 100 megawatt for a project called Shamwan solar power project with total that stretches over more than 2.5 square kilometer in Western Abu Dhabi. 10 megawatt solar photovoltaic plant was also founded in Abu Dhabi. 1 megawatt solar rooftop installations also, and they have a project of carbon capture and sequestration projects. Dubai municipalities launched green building regulation and certification. The aim is to build environment that is resource efficient in terms of energy, water, and materials. So, to reducing building related impact in human health and environment throughout the project, to better setting, design, construction, operation, maintenance, change of the use, and reconstructions. We have also in Qatar, they build or they initiate the energy city, which is invite multinational national gas and oil companies to set up a headquarters there. Its objective are to become the next major energy hub and center of regional operation in the Gulf hydrocarbon development. So also this project seems to be to contradict with Masdar, but its aim to have or to prove that traditional sources of gas can coexist with green technology. In Saudi Arabia, back we have CAUS, King Abdullah University for Science and Technology. The building itself, the campus itself, is environmentally friendly. So the Gulf countries needs long-term strategies application in the region. Before was stated by this reference, which stated several strategies that might be so helpful for energy conservation and peak load management, such as storing energy in thermal storage and thermodeck. The heat recovery for industrial sectors can be utilized to provide electric energy and air conditioning free, which might save millions of kilowatts of energy. Utilizing clean energy is a must for long-term strategies of energy conservation. Energy managers in different sectors were suggested to watch out and monitor for it. About wind and solar energy, wind energy is not that feasible in some countries like Bahrain and Kuwait, but it is might be very feasible for Oman and Qatar, because the wind speed reaches to 5 to 7 meters per second. The conditions for solar energy potential for Gulf countries are among the most favorable in the world. The Gulf countries, cooperation countries, are in the rainless region extending from North Africa to Central Asia, which has 80% clear sky throughout the year. And Saudi Arabia, for example, is irradiated by at least 2,200 kilowatt hour, thermal kilowatt hours per square meter. So a high potential for the desalinization issues, as we mentioned before, that Gulf countries, they don't have a source for fresh water, so they need to go to sea to make the desalinization in order to get the fresh water. So desalinization plants are not only costly in terms of construction and maintenance, they are also costly in terms of large amount of fuel that they are using and their harmful implication to the environment. So using renewable energy such as solar or wind energy to power desalination plant could be a valuable answer to the environment and climate challenges faced by. So what is the possibilities for the use of alternative sources of energy in Gulf countries? From this table, it can be seen that most of the sources of renewable energy were tried in Gulf countries, like solar with all its kinds of photovoltaics or concentrated solar power was tried in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Oman, and Bahrain. Maybe not all of it, but the photovoltaic was has higher contribute. The wind energy was tried by Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, Oman, and Bahrain. The nuclear, Saudi Arabia is in its way to get the first nuclear stations. The hydrogen was tried by Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Oman. Hydrogen energy using hydrogen energy. The biofuels was tried by United Arab Emirates. The biomass was tried by Bahrain. So the accumulation capacity for this source of renewable energy, the highest was tried or was exist in Oman with 213 megawatt, followed by Kuwait with 141.3 megawatt in 2015, and then United Arab Emirates with 125.8 in 2013. So what is the solution of the problems that we were talking about, which is the Gulf countries faces the shortage of energy and the environment problems? The first one is to utilize the available renewable energy resources. Second is to manage and conserve the usage of electricity through the real-time monitoring for electric use. Third, to use the environmental friendly materials for the building, to emphasize the green building. To increase the COB of the HVAC equipment and the efficiency of the car engines. Reduce the pollution through utilizing environmentally friendly car equipment. So we can conclude that for the two past decades, Gulf countries put a huge effort to conserve energy. However, most of them are not effective. Many reasons behind this failure, such that the very high cost of the renewable energy equipment, lack of training and maintenance, the availability of the other sources like fossil fuels. If the consumption of energy are not well managed for the coming decades, the Gulf countries may need to import the fossil fuels instead of exporting it. There is a must need to utilize other sources of energy such as renewable energy and utilize more devices. Thank you for your kind listening, and we are looking for a clean future that uses clean energy resources with clean environment. Thank you again.
Any questions? The second presentation is about massive and active solar strategy, numerical simulation applied in the universal country with complex topology. By Sergio Cosciati. Is the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. So now I will present our work using that in that way. The seven active solar studies in numerical simulation applied in a university canteen with complex topology. The work is developed in the University of Algarve, is located in the south of Portugal. The main objectives of this work is to evaluate the passive and active solar strategy in the university. Now here I present only an example of the canteen. This is a numerical application. The software was developed in the last years in the University of Algarve, and is composed by 3 softwares. So now I present 2, and after I have another presentation, I present the other softwares. The philosophy is a big software that simulates the building with complex topology, and also inside there are another software that simulates the occupants. It places the occupants in the space. The occupants simulate the thermophysiology, the thermoregulatory systems, all the components that is included in it. So it's possible to evaluate the thermal comfort and the energy consumption in buildings. Now here I present the canteen thermal response, occupants thermal comfort, and air quality evaluation in different spaces. So in passive strategy, this work, I consider the building with different opaque and transparent surfaces. And the active strategy in this work is considered the 8 ventilation air conditions with 2 kinds of controls. One of them is the PMV, periodic mean volume. Another is the air temperature, the typical control that you use. I will use to evaluate the indoor air quality, the carbon dioxide concentration, and the thermal comfort. I will use the predict mean volume developed by Fager model. So the numerical model of the building and the occupants, its basis, I use the integral energy balance equations and integral balance mass equations. There are other softwares, including that simulate the solar radiations, the coefficients, convection coefficients, the glass properties, and other components. There are a great group that is included in this software. The software includes also the occupants. In the occupants, the software considers the thermoregulatory of the human body, the different clothing, and the thermoregulatory systems, all the types that is considered in these spaces. The main philosophy of this software, there are 3 parts: inputs, resolution process, and outputs. The more important is the inputs. There are is necessary to introduce the geometry. The geometry is introduced by design, computer and design. I introduce all the geometry. I design the building with all details. The materials, the building's materials properties, external geographic and environment conditions, the occupancy cycle, the occupancy clothing level, dimensions, all details, and the ventilation topology that is necessary. So the most important is the geometry of the building is input in the software, and itself generates all equations that is necessary. Equation systems it generates using the geometry, and the locations of the occupants itself generate all the equations that is needed to simulate the thermoregulatory and the occupant systems. After this point, there are the resolution process is using the Rutherford method with error control, because it's very efficient in this kind of calculus, because the equations and sometimes I have millions of equations. The output, it's solar radiations, air temperature, relative humidity, air velocity, mean radiant temperature, carbon dioxide concentration, thermal comfort, air quality, consumption level, and other details that is necessary. For example, to evaluate the thermal comfort is based in the PMV. The PMV considers the occupant and environment properties. So in the environment properties is using the air temperature calculated by the software, air relative humidity calculated by the software, mean radiant temperature also, and air velocity. The air velocity is calculated by CFD for different compartments. And is necessary also the occupant, the clothing, the activity, and other components. So this is the main philosophy that's used to calculate the occupant. So a canteen that canteen building that you present is considered 27 spaces with 3 levels. So there are different transparent surfaces and different opaque surfaces. That is using this scheme of the building design. This is the input, and they introduce all the properties. So I will consider 3 cases. One of them is without ventilation air conditions. Another, I consider the air conditions using the PMV control. The idea is I use the category C of the ISO 7730. So the control is made in winter conditions, minus 0.7, and summer conditions, 0.7. So this is a step that the control will evaluate. In the free case, I use the temperature 20 in winter and 25 in summer. This is a typical used in Portugal. So I will analyze and present only the results for free spaces. The first space is a bar for students and teachers. The second is a canteen for students. And the third is the canteen for teachers. So only I will present results about this to illustrate the software. This is, as example, the applications that will consider the occupants. So this is the bar, the canteen of the teacher, and I consider 22 occupants. This is the locations that you probably use in more times for lunch. And I simulate the people, all the people is building with 44 cylinders and 1 sphere. The sphere and 45. Some parts is protected by clothing, and others is not protected, and they are considered thermoregulatory systems. So this is the characteristic for it. I use the typical human. And I consider the clothing, typical clothing for summer conditions and winter conditions. This is the first results for the free spaces. This is the evolution of carbon dioxide concentrations. So when the people is higher, the air quality is not good. So it's necessary to introduce, open some windows. And in other cases, the air quality is good. So the air renovations using by natural ventilations is necessary, is verified, is good only when I don't have a lot of vehicles. Second one, results, is the evolution of PMV. So in the first case, you don't have air conditioned systems. The second one, this is the winter conditions. The second one, you have control of the PMV. so the PMV is constant during the control. There are some species that don't need in the winter harm the temperature, because there are a lot of gases and air temperature increasing normally. And this is the typical control when I use the air temperature. So this is the evolution of PMV. Now I will show the same results, but in summer conditions, without control, with control of the free spaces, with the PMV 0.7, and control of the air temperature. In summer, the Algarve, there are higher temperatures. So in summer, it's very complicated, and you need this one control of these systems. The idea is to evaluate the best way to control the systems to reduce the energy consumptions. This is the energy consumption, and in general is higher the consumptions in summer than in winter, because the air temperature in Algarve is very high. This is the evolution of thermal comfort. So here only I present the radiations that the occupants are subjects in the different human body sections. So in winter conditions, there are more sections with radiations. This is associated with the shading devices and the location of the sun in the winter. But in summer, the shading device protects. So this is necessary to introduce in this bus the internal shading device to reduce this point, because this is an important discomfort. I show you in the next, because when the people are not subject to solar radiations, the PMV is similar for all of us. However, when the people are subject to solar radiations, they are very danger and discomfort. So, in conclusions, in this case, the natural renovations is usually guarantee good qualities with low occupation levels. However, when you have higher number of occupants, I should be suggested to open additional open windows. The thermal comfort levels is higher when the PMV control is used. So this is a good system to introduce in the future. The energy consumptions is higher in summer than in winter. So there are difference greenhouse inside, and that is possible to reduce in winter conditions. And the air temperature control promotes higher conditions level than the PMV control. So it's very important to reduce the systems. The human thermophysiology and analyze is possible to evaluate in detail the thermal comfort that the occupant is subject in several species in details. But the problem is when the people are subject to solar radiations. In the future, I will introduce, this is the campus of the University of Algarve, and this is the canteen. So now I have simulations of the whole campus, and I define different strategies to reduce the energy consumption, because it's a very great buildings, and the consumptions is very high. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your nice presentation. Very important one. Anyone have a question?
I have a question. Which kind of drawing or VIM files can you input in this software?
The CAD.
Only CAD?
AutoCAD.
Only AutoCAD, not three-dimensional like Revit.
Three-dimensional AutoCAD.
Okay.
AutoCAD.
So not building the information modeling.
No. Only design. AutoCAD.
Only. Thank you.
Any more questions? I have a question for you. I'm trying to put this software to be as a example. I'm trying to change one value, see like that, or just you open to and put the result.
Yes, I put and get the results.
And then I, for example, check the window ratio to the wall window ratio, or this type or material type.
Yes, I need to introduce all the properties of the systems.
From the beginning.
Yes.
So
And
after
after
you can change one variable later.
all the details of the building is introduced in the package.
Okay.
But the solar radiations, they simulate the solar radiations over time from the simulations. Over the day, the sun, they simulate the sun and they calculate all the buildings, what is the external solar radiations and the internal solar radiations, because some radiations enter in the windows.
So you will get the result for the whole building.
Yes.
Yeah. But for example, if I have a design, I want to estimate for all these variables. How can I manage this variable of the building? This cause this increase or decrease of the or the CO2 presentation.
The influence of the variables in the consolidation.
Yeah.
So the software calculates during the simulations the evolution of their temperature in general, air density, air relative humidity, all the properties, and calculate also for these situations the energy consumption during the day.
Any more questions? Thank you. Thank you very much. The last presentation is about sustainable systematic urban planning principles and theories by Francesco Masciarello.
Thank you.
The floor is yours, please.
You see how it works.
It works. You know, I think it's kind of
Can you put it on
this is you. Yes.
so you can put it on the full screen. I mean, usually you have to
Yeah, you have to
on the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. And you know, if you put that display settings at the top, I think you can make it on the whole big screen.
Can use this one as want to use the last one?
Yeah, yeah. I think put that one
Sure.
there. See, now you get a bigger.
That's what.
Okay, well, look, I can do this, so I can give you this to make it, because I would like this myself. We have this computer, so- Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. So. Okay, so it's working. It's the down goes forward. This one goes backward. And this one goes wide.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon. This is a very general reflection on what we can define city environment. It is not related to a specific part of the world, but we have to go deeper in a medium-sized EU city, like is urban central. So I think it's well accepted as a concept that most of the cities are in a decay situation. So we have, according to technical literature, consider that this decay of the urban environment is mainly related to poor systemic factors and sustainability. According to social cultural factors, economic physical factors. But the generative factors of the urban decay are possible to see in the loss of communitarian sense and political representatives, in the transformation of the economic base generally from industry to services, in the continued increasing of urban integration, in the decentralization processes and loss of spaces, and in the high energy needs and environmental of the city systems. But of course, for the urban system that have urban plans, the decays is also due to the characteristics of the actual urban planning. The poor comprehension of a city as a system. The urban system is an assembly composed by different specialized and interdependent elements which performs different specialized and interdependent functions. For the poor adoption of sustainability measures, because of the rigidity of the top-down processes typical of the lack of operability, not allowing an easy bottom-up participation. Particularly. So, city study requires a change at first toward a systemic and sustainable from the design of urban structure to the processes related to urban structure, from the city environment as disconnected from the rest of the environment, from the exposition of objects to the social interaction within this, and introducing a cultural driver and behavior from the process according to UNESCO definition of sustainability. The drivers that we have tried to drive as an example under this definition of digital social economy. We think that the main way to interrupt urban decay is through urban regeneration processes rather than continuing in urban expansion. This through the activation in empowerment of local communities in the form of association or non-profit enterprises, giving to them operative and financial instruments through ICT and improvement, and using participative web platforms. This is what we are defining digital social economy. That is a different approach in the moment in which the urban regeneration processes only centered in market-centered strategies seems to be not effective. We have deep analyzed part of most part of the historical downtown of Perugia, middle-sized EU city. We have a general framework regarding the urban function and evolution of the city. So the residential, typical in the ancient downtown, has been developed around it and moved to the farthest spaces, creating satellite hamlets within until the real estate crisis of the 2000s. The main technical functions of administrative care, university and schools were mainly and still part of the downtown, but they have been partially decentralized following the city groups, trying to constitute new operations. The industrial obviously are formed originally governments in downtown and then decentralized. Those were part of the government. And the others, commercial and leisures, have in some way followed the growth of the city by integrating transparency and a process that has been frustrated, specifically in the city, by the development of big malls, development that still continues today despite the infrastructure situation, because of the poor control of the urban development, there are important problems, important infrastructural problems that are sometimes solved with brilliant technical solutions, like the mini metro, is a kind of tram, but that are very expensive and not so not so useful. All this result in an intense use of private vehicles. Perugia is one of the most is one of the Italian cities with a bigger ratio of use of auto from private citizens, and because of a general inefficiency and poor use of public transport system. This is a graph. The most interesting thing is the difference in during the growth of the city. You can see the whole city grows, and in the same time, the Anson downtown lose residents from the 2000 about 25,000 of 1951 to about 5,000 of 2011. So it is an important loss of residents. Okay. Relax. The brown dot are the study area. This is the pathway connecting the main part of the historical downtown with the main hospital. This is important because the study area is crossed by this pathway. The weaknesses of the master plan are the main that we have defined before, so I can just this is the focus area. We have evaluated some indicators trying to define the main problems, and these are the residents, student visitors, activities, and crimes. Source of the municipal demography office is regular interviews, newspapers. The analysis have been developed for decades, starting from 1981 to 1991. The study area is crossed by the pathway shown you before, but the ongoing processes of decentralization of the urban function and the absence of recovery measures of the old city started to receive residents from the Anson downtown, including this district. But commercial and artisanal activities along the main street, because of the presence of the main hospital, are still there. The loss of residents that you have seen in the previous picture is compensated by the presence of students because there is an important point. The district neighborhood is safe, not remarkable criminal activities or students. The residents of the district are about 1,000. As you can see, there's a resident from inside outside, and the opposite for the student. A lot of activities are present along the. In the next decade, 1991-2001, the process of decentralization of the whole city functions and activities introduced the transformation of the area of the main city into a residential one. This was a big mistake by public administration because this was a public area, so the residential area was a public investment, not the private. The path begins to lose in importance. No measures were introduced at the urban level for facilitate this transition. For the activities along the major street accelerated the expulsion process. There's an increasing loss of residents, no longer compensated by student residents because the pay of the Anson downtown environment is combined by the decentralization and loss of importance of the Italian cities. And in the neighborhood, as in the whole historical center, starts to be present criminal and minor criminal activities. The residents are about 20% less of the previous decade. The following decade, 2001-2011, the transferring of the city may not be less completed. The pathway is no longer important because this is a new residential zone, so there's no reason to pass through this key area. And local associations are started to be established as an answer to neighborhood behavior, but without success in this. The master plan is the transformation of the ground floor of the old buildings for residential use, trying to recover the presence of students. But the final result was the loss, plus or minus the complete loss of commerciants and craftsmen, because it was for fiscal reasons more interesting to rent to students or to other people than to commerciants and craftsmen. So the number of residents in this case is plus or minus the same as the previous one. But the rental was not devoted to students for the previous reasons, and mainly to regular persons, increasing in some way the criminal activities and control of the downtown and part of the suburbs. In this period, the Perugia is defined on the mainstream media like Gotham City, the capital city of drugs and violence. As you can see, all the activities are disappeared from the main street and from the whole East End area. This is the definition. In 2012, was founded a neighborhood association with the aim to requalify the downtown district based on art and sharing artistic experiences. An immediate success. About the half of the residents of the district are part of this association. As a consequence, in the same period has been relaunched an historical decommissioned cinema in the old downtown were present a lot of cinemas, but the big malls and the big cinemas of the outside downtown have been substantially decommissioned all the old cinemas. So this is the first one that we started these activities in 2014 as a consequence of the new association activity. But they integrated a process of citizen participation and involvement, not only spectators, but also financiers and associates of the new venture, sharing some other cultural projects connected to the cinema. The adoption of the mode of social economy for both districts and the use of normal social direction technology, not dedicated social media figure. Although not exclusive, were crucial for the effectiveness of both of these and activated both for building a community and for managing. The activities, together with cinema social enterprise, have been capable to start urban regeneration process through recovering the public space with intervention of artistic urban furnishing and returning life to this. Did all this with full organizational and economic support of public administration and from the profit enterprises, and null from urban massive activists. A lot of shops have come back along the main streets, the prevailing presence of customer activities, together with many restaurants and bars, we see the attendance of an increasing number of non-resident visitors. The number of residents have grown up 20% more before the first decade I showed you. The rental of all the old building has been devoted to at the moment, there are no significant criminal activities in this. This is the graph residents, about 1,200. This is our plan. We have seen that not only for this experience, but more generally, that spontaneous urban regeneration processes can be activated by citizen community or association, non-for-profit, with a specific attention to the district life. They have activated directly urban regeneration processes or using social web platforms. For this kind of process, the contribution of public administration and the urban master plan was very poor effective or non-effective at all. As it is poor effective, the contribution of urban of your profit enterprise. What we think could be one of the possible engine for this kind of processes is the introduction of this concept in light blue picture that will define a digital social economy. In this way, we have the connection within the urban master plan of building participating web platforms that are exactly devoted. These two names are working web platforms. Citizen Lab is in is possible. Uganda works in Italy and in UK. That are mainly devoted not to urban planning, but more to managing environmental problems. But they can be used for this aim too. And in this way, we have that the public administration and for-profit enterprises can contribute to the definitions and setup of these platforms, and through the master plan, we all together they can reactivate urban regeneration processes. As conclusions, the sustainability of the urban system is primarily in the set of relationships that identify it as a community of living beings. With the poor help from politics, sometimes against urbanistic plan forecasts, the community of citizens are demonstrated to be able to trigger processes of urban regeneration, often using cultural practice. Urban regeneration can therefore be activated starting from communitarian regeneration processes as the basis of the urban regeneration itself. Adopting the modes of social economy and using social interaction technology. That's why we are defining this process, digital social economy. In highly complex environments such as this one, that's why we are talking about systemic approach. DSE is a promising process for activating this kind of processes, not the more promising than only market-based strategies. The involvement in urban planning design of communitarian associations needs devoted instruments such as SIT web platforms, not only these platforms integrate knowledge from different areas, urban planning and transportation, GIS, social media, and are focused not only on urban planners, but mostly on citizens, in the way to make them effectively involved in the planning process. The introduction of institutional platforms could contribute to return to administration an effective role in urban system mapping as living beings and to give answers to the increasing bottom-up participatory processes request, and to give concrete form to the community operational contribution in urban regeneration processes. Through DSE, we think it could be possible to back effectiveness, more effectiveness to the urban urbanistic plans for managing the complex systemic factors of the built environment in a sustainable way, involving all the actors. So this is a way to mediate within the public administration from one side and the private sector on the other side. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Any question, any comments? Yes.
I think the phenomenon that Francesco spoke of the city center empty now, that's quite general in a lot of parts of the world, and certainly many cities I know in the United States, that the downtown area, in big cities and in small cities and medium. And in I don't have statistics, but just anecdotally, as they say, in talking to people, I'm sure that crime and the perception of crime is really important. And it's funny because I think that the left, if I can put it that way, I consider myself part of the cultural left. We're more comfortable in an urban environment. We like the urban environment, and we're maybe more willing to put up with a little bit of danger in the urban environment. And we don't want to speak of the crime because that's usually the province of the right. It's the province of Donald Trump, etc. to talk, and it has the strong racial overtones to it because, in fact, the crime does have, has racial proportions to it and disproportions. So that's just a comment from my own experience, is that it creates this non-conversation about what to do about the urban environment. I'd just like to hear Italian reaction to that, or anybody else's.
Yes.
What about the effect of changing the destination, the use of specific strategic buildings as a way to promote?
With this experience,
Yeah,
They
somehow, force the flow of people into specific directions that are considered positive by changing the destination use of specific buildings.
this is with regard to this experience. This is an experience based on not an urban planning situation. So they cannot modify the destination of use of buildings. They can only try to find a complementarian use of the spaces that they own and of the public space, like squares. And so it's more in terms of practical use than in terms of destination. So at the end is the way, that's why I told you about communitarian use of the city, is more about the way they have used the way they have used that part of the city that have changed the life of the city, mainly with regard to the crime situation, because the presence of persons is the.
That's why I'm asking if it can be considered like public administration tool that change buildings use, because it seems from your historical solutions, it was a couple of very important buildings and the change of their area destination that has triggered all this urban flows.
Yes, yes. In my opinion, the main problem of urban planning is in this situation. And specifically for the experience of the decentralization of the old hospital, is that it does happen without any kind of involvement of the persons of the community. So the idea is to match the community with the provision of the urban planning, involving directly the citizens. The two these two web platforms allows to single persons to operate directly in the environment, in the virtual environment, and in the real environment, using the app that you can have on your mobile phone. So you can participate, but participate means you can say, yes, I agree with this kind of solution, I do not agree with this kind of solution. I prefer, I propose this kind of solution. Is a form of debate. I think that this could be one way to integrate the contents of an urban plan with the spontaneous of the spontaneity of a community. I'm not sure that I answered properly to your question.
Yeah. But
Yes,
there are,
Sorry.
there are some things citizens are not aware of. They need to have a wider view of the city, not just as a urban planner, but according to the planet of the urban fabric. For example, if you have administration, have information about the outskirts of the cities, how do you have the power to move that school or that kindergarten or that hospice from that place that is not stopped by the city to another
Yes,
location where
this is the power of the public administration. What I feel is that you can, if you want to do this process, if you want to perform this process with success, you have to involve the government. You have to, not you probably. Generally, involvement is according to Italian law. The involvement is mandatory by law. But it happens at the end of the process. But when they have decided to move the city main hospital, when all the layouts are ready, national, architectural, certain was complete, they will show it to you in the public space. The process is finished. You have to start this kind of involvement before or at the same time you want to move. At the time you have decided to move the school from one spot to another part of the city, you have to involve using, for example, this kind of process.
That's this. Another question, but maybe I can say, did you include the real estate prices? Real estate prices?
No.
Because it's in Belgium.
What do you mean with real estate?
The price of houses.
No, I understand that, but if this, I don't know exactly.
Well, in Belgium, we have a program that young families move out of the city because they cannot afford to buy a house in the city center.
If this is one of the reasons, yes, probably.
Okay, but it's not included in one of your parameters.
No, because it is a little bit more complex, because one of the reasons, because of the so important flow of residents from the Anson downtown, was the best conditions, the best physical conditions of the Anson downtown. So the urban planning has considered the city growth as a value in itself, not including the specific measures for recovering the urban. So at the end, people prefer to stay in neither, no, but in a more safe and for the moment, but in a few years, the satellite districts are not so in the same good condition at the beginning. So,
Yes, please.
Also, time limitation, so I can only brief comments on your presentation. And you just mentioned about urban generation process. Our government do things like this years, but our experience is that I see the wealthy place become more wealthy, and the poor place become even more poor. So I don't know. I don't want to have an answer, but this is a problem in China.
So let me understand better your point.
Now, in China, they want to be generate some new town,
New time.
and a new order.
Okay.
But the farmer do not plant the farm and go to the town and in the rural, how to say, the farm place, no people.
Okay.
Just all elder people and maybe small children.
As you can see, I think that with regard, I don't know the China situation, so, but your situation is completely different from the one. But we have a lot of buildings, so we really do not need to build new buildings or increase the dimension of the city. So I think that it's better to recover what we have and densifying or requalifying. That's why I'm talking about urban regeneration against concentrating urban expansion. Probably in China, for the reason I don't know, you need to move person to the city for social reasons. I think it's a completely different process. If it was possible to maintain in the
Lastly, I think you are not engineering expert, but also a very good artist. So because you make a very beautiful, very wonderful PPT document. Thank you. Thank you.
Any more questions? Yes, I understood that the lion's share was taken care by the private sector. I just wanted to understand that the city council, the public administration, so they saw there was something moving and they just pushed it. Was it like they put some harbors? At the same time, I understand that if you want to regenerate the urban tissue, you need also public means of transportation. So a certain degree of involvement by the public administrations. Did they view it in a favorable way, this overall process?
This is only a schematic way to think. It has completed to being built. I think that at the end, this could be one way to. So my point is, for my professional and political experience, I see that in this moment, in this part of the world, persons want to be involved in the decision about the city, which is the future of the city. A lot of the main part of the decisions regarding this city, I know this very well, have been taken by the public administration without any kind of, and because of, it is not a direct connection, but because of some of these decisions were completely wrong, and because of the fact that the community pays for these mistakes, just for some transportation systems that costs for a small medium city, about 10 million euro each year to the collectivity. Because the big mistake in the disengagement of the main hospital, not transporting, for example, in a college like this one, which we will know, but in a residential area, you do not need residential areas. There are a lot of that not occupied. So the point is, I think that if public administration and for-profit enterprise will be connected around involving citizen community, using the instruments that now we have and connecting with urban planification, including public spaces, public administration functions, and everything, including transport systems. In this kind of decision, I think it could be much more effective. You think, for example, you're Italian, just like me, you know the situation of the high velocity train in Piemonte. Probably you spend 12 years, 20 years, 30 years before completing your design, your project. With this, it is demonstrated that using this kind of instruments, you can reduce the timing of the investment because the involvement of citizens is a way to reduce the opposition. It is a way to make more interesting the investment for for-profit enterprises and reduce the problems of the public administration in the management of this kind of processes.
I have one more comment. I think that the problem with the cities around the world, even as you mentioned, the empty of the downtown because of the crowd. I think the crowd because to the downtown because the downtown became empty. This is because the living forces of the development of the cities is the traditional value. So now the downtown is moving around the mega malls, hypermarket, supermarket, malls, not by the community. This is the main so the commercial value of the cities they grow according to the economic people, not the community needs. So if we go back to the community and make the city develop according to the community needs, and we get the city. So I think we need to go to what we instead of smart cities, we need smart cities.
Yes, absolutely.
I'll just comment on that. I've lived in Boston, and the lowest crime part of Boston, the Italians here will like this, is the most Italian part, is the north end of Boston. And people say
It's usually
it's because there are many eyes on the street. Oh, gee. There's a lot of people on the street all the time, so and people know each other.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to, take something and run away. So it's to reinforce your point that it's not just that the crime makes it empty, the empty makes it more crime.
Yeah, so this is my point. Yeah. And it's became empty because now, like this university, they move it away from the city center, and the hypermarket move it away, so that people they need to go to the suburbs for shopping or to study, and the city down will be empty. The crowds come back to the city.
I can add a comment.
No.
There is another reason maybe for crime concentrated spots in the city. I can tell you what is happening in Ancona. After the problems, and all the troubles in Tunisia, a lot of people came to Ancona, like a lot, because Ancona opened its doors to all the refugees. And what they did was to concentrate not in the downtown, not in the station area, where all the people lived. Because as soon as the houses got empty, they colored their families because those people died and the houses were available. So they have like their own little town now in specific areas of the city as well. They're all dispersed. This is another weird trigger for.
This is the problem of the community is that you have to find a way to transform this community. So these persons have to be involved in the community. This is an Italian problem. Management of this situation is very bureaucratic, and there's not social involvement of this person. So they pay for doing nothing and stay here. It's a way to solve an international problem, but without regard of the communitarian problems that will be created in introducing this kind of persons without a connection with the local communities. One way to manage well this situation would be the same. So when you have, so one way could be the micro, not big spots of this person, but a lot of persons in very diffuse around the environment. And another way is to manage the situation involving the community. Not the prefect, not the main prefect or the community, because the city is.
Yeah, even because it's sad, because Ancona is a super calm town, but in that place, every day there is something to read on the newspapers about that place. And this is not good for people living that. Everyone, it's crazy thing.
And the most worst case when the government moved their offices from the downtown. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you all for your attention. So it was very useful session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you think, Francesco, do you think we should go get tea first?
Oh, yes.
Now he is the
I know.
one you asking.
Yeah, he's a strict, the hard teacher.
So it's moving on the tea, but our
Yeah. Well, we'll probably lose half our audience still. I need them to see. So there's, you were saying that you didn't make it explicit that you were implying that some of the immigrants were preying upon the old people because they're more vulnerable.
It's a strategy that I've never experienced before. We don't think this can be this having this is more or because it's station or not. But because
Better to rob.
I live in that area and the house because I never experienced
Right.
So
Single woman.
yeah, my roommate.
Yeah.
And that was sad. Because I'm outside, but I'm
So I
Right.
in the office, it's going to be very like in a couple of weeks.
Right.
it changed completely.
Right, and then I bet it became even cheaper because no one wanted to live.
Yeah, but I'm doing what I'm doing.
Countryside,
Most of the time, it happens between us.
the people
Well, of course, yes.
to the city. So the farm, the person
So we are
and the farm four and the four. Very different situation.
No, it is something that was seen probably half a century before. So the modernist period. So what happened
In very short time.
Yeah, a very short time. Yes. Now we have to manage the opposite. So we have to bring back
So,
people to
so something can be quickly, something should
just
have
like your
time accumulated.
Yes, you're a very quick situation.
Yeah.
And not only very quick, but also very big.
Yeah. 点可能就上。好吧。好，打完就算了。对，4点差不多结束。4点下面最后一个就没看到人了。那个不就网了？不，还有一个那个 CMC 就是那个老头。哦。啊。他是在我前面，他在你前面。最后一个。你要不要水？我给你弄点。不用不用不用。那你别走了，这地方还有东西什么的。哦，来。
Are you, your presentation is still there or you're done?
Yes.
Do you need some decontact?
No, it's not.
I can bring all you. Okay.
No, I thought something.
instant, instantaneous,
Eh?
Those one. Those.
Yeah, I'll get it. Put it on the wrong one. Put it on this one. There we go. Okay. Ah, huh?
Oh, the A,
Yeah, you like that one?
the next one.
All right, thanks. For some reason, they didn't put me on. Trying to get rid of me. But, stronger batteries. Okay, well, I guess we should get started because it is time. We'll set up. We'll set up.
So, good afternoon, Professor Stoddard. Carbon tax on three fossil fuels.
Thank you.
Please.
Okay, I've given this talk in an earlier stage a couple of times, one at Boston University and once in the far east of Russia. It's because of the implications for gas, for natural gas, of having carbon taxes, because Russia has a lot of gas, so they're interested. Okay, so and if I have time, I could talk more about the geopolitics of it at the end. So it's a simple idea that carbon taxes make natural gas the most important fossil fuel. And I'm going to show that even a modest carbon tax, $20 per metric ton, which is about half of the most modest tax that is usually mentioned, $40 a ton is more common. But even this modest tax will be the end of coal and has a serious impact on oil, and natural gas will go way up in use and demand. So I start quantifying those points. Okay, if you don't believe anything in this paper by me, here's one thing you can believe, which is Shell Oil, which is not only Shell Oil, but these European companies. That's Norwegian, no, sorry, that's French, that's Norwegian, that's Italian, and these two are British. Together, they're the biggest natural gas holders in the world, private natural gas holders. Shell is the biggest. Gazprom of Russia has more than 30 times as much gas in reserves as Shell Oil. So they're much, much bigger. But they all, in this statement, come out for, this is a letter arguing to this was 3 years ago, 2015, arguing for carbon taxes. And why are they doing this? I think it's because they have gas. And they realize that it's going to increase the demand for gas. Okay? And why? Because it generates half the carbon emissions of coal. So that's pretty. So there's nothing new here that I'm going to argue as far as that. That's well known. The carbon taxes are going to kill coal. Coal's already in a lot of trouble, and it's going to be good for gas. What I want to do is look into it more in detail and try to see what the short-term impacts are, and to try to understand how much we should tax and how quickly we should raise those taxes. I'm trying to forecast the short to medium term future. Okay, so as they say, that gas can be a flexible partner to so this is at least the rhetoric. Okay, so here's the methodology. This guy who got the Nobel Prize in economics a few years ago, he's an economist at Princeton. The methodology I'm going to use is increasingly what is used in macroeconomic models. And they're called vector autoregressions. And probably most of you have not had too much on regressions. But the basic idea of it is simplification. Traditionally, big macroeconomic models are what were called structural equations, where you're trying to model the forces of the economy, the way that different sectors of the economy interact. With vector autoregressions, you're trying to do something much simpler. You just take a group of variables that you believe are interrelated in some way. And you don't specify any theory about how they're just correlated. They move together or they move oppositely across time, and you just basically want to map that equation. As he says, there's no accompanying story, but you can begin to, I underline this part, to interpret them with informal theory. And these are called, by adding restrictions, which I will do, that is, you limit what the regression can come up with. And I'll show you how you can test those restrictions. These are called structural VARs. That is, you build in a little bit of structure that you believe is justified, and then you can test those restrictions to see if they make sense. So here's an interesting article this is MIT's Business Magazine. So it's why forecasts fail and what to do instead. And basically in it, he tells the story of why these big structural equations, which economists up until a decade ago approximately believed in, and they thought, well, these structural equations are much, much better than these simple correlations that the business people use, because we're bringing theory, we're bringing much more information into it, and it turns out that for forecasting purposes, less is more. That these vector autoregression models do a much better job in forecasting. So it's kind of a paradox. And so here's part of the idea. There's many fewer variables. So there's lower data requirements, and that winds up giving you, as they say, more degrees of freedom, more possibilities to measure. And essentially, what you want is to have a very high ratio of observations relative to the number of things that you're trying to measure or estimate, and that's what you're able to do. The theory is not built in; it's implicit. These are kind of technical points, but if you've done regressions, all the explanatory variables are historical and known, so you don't have to do a forecast in order to do a forecast, because you're talking about the future, okay? But you're basically doing at least the short run future. You're doing it on the basis of historical data, okay? And all these things show that there's a lot of experience to show that these VARs are more accurate. And it's 1, 2, and 3 that explain 4. Okay, so I'll do this really fast. It's just a little bit of theory about how you look at the proportion of the taxes between how much goes to the consumer and how much goes to the producer. And it's real simple out of a supply and demand curve, that the consumer share is relative to the producer share is basically the ratio of their slopes. The absolute value of the ratio of their slopes, because of course this is a negative slope. That can be interpreted in terms of so-called elasticities or sensitivities. But basically what I do is I take the mid-range of these elasticities. This is the elasticity of demand relative to the elasticity of supply. So this ratio in absolute value terms is approximately 3. And so that gives you the ratio of the taxes on the producer relative to the tax on the, it should have been, I'm sorry, that should have been a C there. The tax on the producer relative to the tax on the consumer. And then you can feed this back into the information about how much carbon there is per unit of fuel. And you'll see here that the unit of fuel on coal in the United States and in Britain is what's called a short ton. So it's not the metric ton, but it's about 10%. It's about 10% less than the metric. Interestingly, 1 short ton of coal produces 2 metric tons of carbon dioxide. So you might ask, how does less produce more? You know, well, it's because of the O. It's the O2. You know, there's 2 oxygen molecules for every molecule of carbon. So you actually produce more carbon dioxide than the coal that goes into it. So and you can see that this is per unit of fuel. It's not per unit of energy, but you can see that the production for units of fuel are much less for oil and gas. And here's the deal: a $20, because of this number here, a $20 per ton on coal is basically enough to kill coal, because that's very close to the price, the producer price of coal in the United States today. Okay, so that, you know, the taxes would be 100%. And it gets split between, this is how, given this ratio of taxes here, this is how much the producer price is reduced, and this is how much the consumer price would be increased in order to get this $20 a ton tax on carbon. Okay. And so you can see the taxes are much smaller they're smaller on oil, and they're much smaller on gas. This is what's called, I won't go into this in any detail, but this is what's called a vector error correction model. It's a kind of specialized form of vector autoregression, which has more information in it. And this shows you what kind of the long-term relationship between the, and I should say, there are 12 variables in my model, because there's 3 fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas, and each one of them has 4 variables, because there's a price for the consumer and a price for the producer, and there's a quantity that the producer puts out there and a quantity that the consumer demands. And so I estimate those all separately, and I have approximately 144 variables or parameters to estimate, because I have 12 variables and I have 12 lags. That is, I'm looking back 12 months into the past. 1 month back, 2 months back, all the way back to 12 months back. So that gives you 144, and then there's a couple of other variables, a trend variable and a constant. This might have more information for you. Probably most of you know what the R squared, if you've done any regression at all. It's basically the proportion of the variation which is being explained by the regression. And so what you get here is that these R squareds are decent. These are the R squared, these are the adjusted R squared. And the coefficient on the error correction term, it's basically the idea of how much the relationship is adjusting to keep this long-term relationship between the variables stable. It's like the variables, think of these as like 4 variables that are moving along across time, and they have a fixed or a relatively fixed relationship, but one of them could like move away for some reason, and it will tend to move back over time. And the error correction model basically takes that error, that divergence, and adjusts back in the other direction to keep that relationship stable. So this is an estimate. This is saying how close that model fits the data. Okay. And what it shows is, and these are actually average quantities. That is average over a year. What it shows is these error correction terms. These are the T statistics, and 3 stars means significant at the 1% level, and actually the p-value is much better than that. But these are very high T statistics in general on the quantity term. So this error correction mechanism is pretty powerful. Okay, there's two restrictions that I put. I'm about to get to the good stuff. I'm going to give you just a little bit of technical stuff. There's two restrictions that I put on it. One is from reality that oil and gas are, as economists would say, complements in production. That is, you make one, you make the other. If you make milk, you're going to make butter, as a rule, because it comes out in the process when you take the cream. So when you drill for oil, when you bring up the oil, gas comes up too. Natural gas comes up too. I have actually worked in oil fields quite a bit in my youth, in my crazy misspent youth before I finished university. I actually worked in oil fields in Louisiana and California. And I've seen many oil fields at night, back 30, 40 years ago when I was doing this, where they're burning off the natural gas. As they say, they're flaring. You can see this throughout the Middle East as well. That is, they're getting all this natural gas, but they didn't want it then because it wasn't worth very much. So they just burned it off at the surface. We're going to get to the point, I think, and this is what my estimates show, where we may have the opposite problem. That is, we're not going to want all the oil that we're getting in the process of getting the natural gas. And we're going to have to figure out what to do with it. So what this graph shows is that there's a close relationship, and that this relationship is getting closer all the time. The correlation between the two of them. I think that is because of the fracking revolution, which was starting right about here, around 2013, 2014. Really, and this is all American data. It's all U.S. data because it goes back. I have data, pretty good data going back to like the mid-1980s, monthly data. Okay, so that's one restriction I put in it, and the restriction can be seen by the fact that the T statistic on the error term for, this is the quantity of oil which is produced and the quantity of gas that produced, they're exactly the same to 3 decimal points. But basically I have a restriction that those, the coefficient is not the same, but the ratio of the coefficients is stable. The other restriction I impose on it is that the changes, because the United States, it's now starting to export coal to Europe and largely to Germany. But historically, the United States has been, which has a lot of coal, has been self-sufficient in coal. So it doesn't export much of it, it just eats it itself. And so my restriction has been, and I'll tell you later why I did this, it's for empirical reasons, is that the error correction on these terms is the same. I didn't specify what it would be, but I just specified that it would be the same. And so you can see that there. This is the change in the coal produced, and the change, D means the change, and the change in the coal demanded by the consumer. Okay, so here's the two tests. The first test is I look at the R squared on a restricted model where I impose those restrictions, and then an unrestricted model where I don't impose it at all. And I have here the R squared on the restricted minus the unrestricted. And so if it's positive, which you can see in blue, that means you're getting actually a higher degree of explanation, a higher R squared on the restricted model. If you know too much about regressions, you'll know that that's actually kind of unusual. That is, if you had a simple linear regression, that wouldn't happen. Imposing any restriction would actually bring down the R squared. But because this is a highly nonlinear system, it doesn't work that way. But so that's good news for me, you know. So it shows that these restrictions have actually made their regressions work better, okay, in a sense. But that 8 out of 12. And then this is another one, another test. This is mean absolute percentage error. I basically look at the I stop I do an estimate that stops in 2015, and then I compare its forecasts 3 years ahead. And I say, what's the error between what actually happened, because now I know what actually happened, and what is forecasted. And that can be measured as the mean absolute percentage error. And so in this one, it's the restricted minus the unrestricted. So if it's negative, that means that the unrestricted had a bigger error. Okay? And so in 10 out of the 12, the error is actually bigger on the unrestricted form. So this makes me like the restrictions. My restrictions are doing a good job for me. Okay, that's the technical part. I'll do one more thing here. Is that the two that were the biggest are both the biggest errors. That is, if you compare all these errors, mean absolute percentage errors, the biggest ones are on the price of gas and oil, and it's also the biggest difference in these mean absolute percentage errors are on gas and oil. And that's the fracking revolution. That's because there's been, as I mentioned, I think before, the United States is, for the last 2 or 3 years, has been the largest producer of oil and gas in the world. It doesn't have more oil and gas. Like Saudi and Venezuela have a lot more oil. Russia has probably 4 times as much gas as all of North America. But the United States and Canada are mining both oil and gas more quickly because of fracking. Okay, and so these regressions don't completely capture that very recent past. So there's larger error terms there. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, all right. So I got to move it here. Okay, so too much technical stuff. Okay, so here's here I'll look at the oil prices to producers and the oil quantities from producers. What I do is I do 2 different simulations. And you can see that these go out to 2022. So basically, it stops in early 2018, and it goes out to 2022. So it's like 5 years of estimates. So 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. And what I do is in these left-hand panels here, I impose a $20 tax all at once. I impose it for 6 months on top of what the historic prices were, and I just see what happens, okay? Whereas in these, I introduce it gradually. I introduce it over 2 years, gradually, piece by piece. But I get to the same place. I get to a $20 tax, but I do it gradually. And so I'm measuring here at the first 6 months and then the final 6 months of what that does. So this is the first stage of the tax, and the PP stands for price to producers for oil, and this is the second stage. And this one just goes from 0. The blue line is 0, meaning no tax, and this is the tax with 20. And so what you can see from this is, and you'll see this again and again, is that the price goes up more gradually for the gradual tax, which is not too surprising, but it also gets higher. It ultimately gets higher. No, than when you do it all at once. Why do you think that would be? I think it's because there's more, if you do it gradually, there's more opportunities for economic substitution for both producers and consumers. You can also see here that the increase in there's actually an increase in quantity here. Now that's surprising, but you'll see that's because of this connection between gas production and oil production, and that a lot of that production of oil is not going to be used. It's being produced, but it's not being consumed. It's like I said about the oil fields and flaring it all. Okay, so I'll look at this one. I'm going faster than I would rather do. But this is the oil quantity to consumer. And that number, these are in 1,000 cubic feet. So that's about 1,000 times 1,000. That's about 18 million cubic feet per month. And how much was being produced on the earlier one is about 26 million. So consumers are consuming 8 million cubic feet less per month. Again, you see that the effects of doing it gradually. In this one, they get to about the same place, but they do it in a more regular way. So there'll be less economic disruption from doing it gradually. Okay, here's gas. Here's the good news. Remember that the tax on producers is a negative tax. That is, it reduces how much the producers get. But the price to the gas producers actually goes up by a factor of 5. Why is that? How do you get higher prices when you get when you put a tax on? It's all because of demand. It's because people are demanding a lot more gas, as you'll see. So this is a bonanza for producers. Okay, the price of gas is going up by a factor of 5, and their production goes up a great deal as well. Again, you're getting a bigger final effect by doing gradual than you are by doing it all at once. And here's to the consumers. The price that the consumers will pay is a little bit higher than the price, which is good, than the producers get. But it goes up a similar amount, and the amount that is consumed goes up by about 50%. And here's what happens to coal. The price goes negative on coal. Okay, so now the rest of the data on coal doesn't show it going to 0, but I'm going to interpret the fact that the price goes negative as meaning that the production will go to 0. And this is, I won't take the time to get real technical, but this is there's a strength and a weakness to this vector autoregression model, which is there's the regression doesn't know anything. Basically it just knows what's happened in the past. So it knows that the production is reducing, the production of coal is reducing, and the demand for coal is reducing, but it doesn't know by how much. But I'm going to interpret the fact that the price has gone negative to mean that production is going to collapse. Okay, here's the impact. I look at this model and I show that the total value change is actually an increase. The value of oil and the value of coal goes down, but the value of gas goes up the gas that is actually produced goes up. The energy goes up. It goes down for oil and coal, but it goes up a hell of a lot for gas. Just from this it's a relatively minor tax, $20 a metric ton, much smaller than what most people say. If there was just a mechanical correlation between energy increase in GDP, this would imply an energy increase of this amount would imply about a 1.5% increase in GDP. I don't really believe that. I don't think it's mechanical like that, but it's in the right direction. And here's the big one, which is pollution impact. The net pollution decrease. It goes up for gas, but it goes down by much more, especially for coal, because coal is where most of it and it goes down by 3.3 billion tons or gigatons. The United Nations Energy Program estimates that by 2025, in order to stay under a 1.5 Celsius rise, we would need to reduce by about 10 gigatons globally from all sources of CO2, okay? This is only from energy production, but if you scale this up, in fact, the world uses about 7 times as much energy from carbon, or has a world CO2 output, I should say, about 7 times that of the US. So if you scale this up, basically a 3.3 gigaton would translate into 33% of the requirement to reduce world carbon. So the basic conclusions are that you know, coal is dead, oil is in trouble, and the gas goes up. Then gradual is better than all at once, but it, you know, slightly gradually. And then surprisingly small carbon taxes have a big effect. But I will also end by saying, I think I've underestimated, I'm sure I've underestimated the effect of these carbon taxes. Why? Because there's no solar. It's because I don't have, and that's not because I don't like it, it's because I don't have good long time series on renewable energy. So and people will say, you know, in my presentations of this, well, aren't you know, damaging implicitly renewables by just focusing on carbon? And I would say no. If you want to promote renewable energy, tax carbon, because it will benefit the renewable energy. And if you want to benefit renewable energy more, tax carbon higher. So you have to decide how much and how fast you want to tax carbon. But that's the tool, that's the lever to make things go forward. But I'll just this is an oil company, energy company, consulting firm, and they're looking at what they call grid parity here for an additional you know, megawatt basically of electrical power produced by the cost of it produced by photovoltaic and produced by other methods. And what they say is that in half of the United States by 2035, which is only, you know, 17 years from now, in more than half of the United States, you'll be at or below grid parity in terms of the cost of photovoltaic, because a lot of the United States is very sunny. There's more I could say, but I'm sure that this is an underestimate of the effects of the carbon taxes. And in future work, and by the way, I just recently got a grant to put on a conference at Boston University. I probably should have announced this earlier to get more impact, but in 3 years' time, I'm going to put on a conference on carbon taxes at Boston University. So if you know someone or you want to be someone who's doing work on carbon taxes and how they will affect things and stuff, I'm going to try to put on a big international conference at Boston University in a few years' time. So tell your friends. Okay, so thanks. Thanks for the time.
If you agree, I propose to
Move forward.
yes, for the question
Sure.
at the end of
Sure.
the three speakers. So I call for Mr. Peng C. with development and utilization for the classical JK and energy side reduction model in coal breaking.
Okay. Is it one of those? Do you see it? Oh, it's somewhere. That one.
Day two.
Maybe they did. There's two of
Day
them. That one. Okay, excellent. You can use this one if you like to make it go forward. So that makes that goes forward and that goes back. That's all you need, forward, back.
Good afternoon, everyone. I will take the in-out presentation.
It'd be better to make it bigger. I'll make it bigger for you so it looks better.
Okay.
I think it's better. Yeah, it's pretty.
So,
Excuse me.
so my presentation is the development and implementation of the classical GK and reduction model in code language. My topic may be some different with most of the presentation in this session. So I will, this presentation includes 5 parts. The first one, introduction or background. Just as you know, particle braided is energy intensive processing. The industrial statistics indicate that only nearly 0.5 to 2% of electric power generation is consumed by our railway system. For mineral processing plants, this proportion increased to about 7% of the total energy consumption. So improvement of surrounding energy and energy saving is important, and it must be based on the good understanding of the energy reduction and the relation between the input and output during the grounding process. So work in this paper developed the classical energy reduction model and expanded its utilization on homogeneous and heterogeneous grounding in vertical spiral field. These 3 models are the classical GK energy reduction model and its modified ones. These 3 models are based on these 2 machines. This is the GK rotary tester, and this is the drop rate tester that use impact force to break particles. Now, this works different with the grounding mechanism of vertical spiral power, which the loading force acts on particles slowly. So, in this case, we use a lab scale roller mill to simulate the grounding process of particles in vertical spiral power riders. This is the system, and this is the prime example of the roller. How energy consumption during the grounding process is measured by a power manometer. On the other hand, we also use the standard particle mill to conduct the comparison study. Experimental consists of 3 parts. The first one is comparison energy efficiency. So the 2 mills are used, and the particles code in 3 different size fractions tested in the lab scale roller mill, and the particles from 5 size fractions are run in the standard particle mill. This is the first part. So the second part of this research is the response of energy reduction characteristics for coal properties. Because we know coal contains a lot of minerals, so it's density distributed in a wide fraction. So in this research, we choose coal samples in narrow sets and density fractions, as shown in this table. It is in narrow set and Ashton. So the last part of this experimental is the heterogeneous grounding of coal and calcite. Because within the grounding process, materials on the ground table of vertical spiral mill is complex. It consists of minor minerals and it also consists of UV. So we conduct simulation studies. The sample used in this test is the calcite and coal of 2.8 to 2 millimeter, and the next visual of 2 components this for 4 levels, and the runtime also for 4 levels. So I'll give you the results of this project. For the first one, comparison of energy reduction process of code between roller mill and the ball and wrist mill. They made the standard hardware mill. The first of this figure just is the result of test in roller mill. As the parameter of roller mill change in the test, so the relation between Dr. T10 to energy input are discarded. But it still shows a close agreement among fitting lines of classical energy reduction model and data for all cases. But grounding energy efficiency, for example, for the same energy input, the practice 10 different. This is due to the various operational parameters. In the case, for the better comparison, we use the fitting result of test with change of only loading force of fractional fittings by the classical energy reduction model. So two lines are shown here. The right line is the particles inside of 11.2 to 8, and the blue one is the fitting line of particles of 9 to 8 to 5.6 millimeter. This is for the roller mill, and this is for the hardware mill. These two figures show the good fitting result of the classical breakage model, but it still has some problem. This state are scattered, so we introduce the particle size in the classical energy reduction model, and we get a good fitting results for these two mills. So can we give the conclusion that the two ground mills show the same energy efficiency? I think we cannot, because the samples we used in this study are different. For the hardware mill, they are 4 to 0.5, and for the roller mill, it's much bigger. In this case, for the data comparison, we first we make the comparison between measured and predicted T10 by model fitting parameters based on two mills. This is used the fitted parameters by this is used fitted parameters by hardware mill, and this is used for the roller mill. So this shows the data result. From this result, we know that if the practical increases over 70%, productive values that fitted parameters of hardware mill are smaller than measured ones. Predicted results of roller mill show a higher fitting capability with measured T10. So in this case, experimental data of two mills can be fitted by the same parameters, but there's still some difference with the parameters of two mills. For example, there are 8 rollers in the hardware mill, but there is only 1 roller in the roller mill. So it can be concluded that breakage events that particles undergo in hardware mill are 4 times higher than those in the roller mill for the unit time. So from this point, we think the running energy efficiency of roller mill is much higher. Second is the effect of particle property on the energy reduction. This figure shows the result. From the figure, the quantitative analysis indicates that grounding energy efficiencies increase with the particle size and increase with agitation. However, quantitative comparison of energy efficiency cannot be conducted due to the scattered distribution of experimental data, or due to the sample are in different size fraction and agitation. So it is essential to develop a modified breakage model with addition of these two parameters. In this case, we first use the one and the particle size in the model and get a better result. But there are still some difference. So we try to add the agitation in the model 2, and we get a good fitting result for all the experimental data. From this data, we can make a conclusion that the specific energy consumed by coal, or 25%, ash is 20% lower than that of coal in 45%, yield the same productivity of 30%. The last one is the determination of energy split factors of components in the heterogeneous surrounding in flow and grist mill. First, we conducted a study with Marsden, which noted that the energy consumed in the mixed grinding is the sum of energy consumed by each component. So this equation is valid. And if we divide it by the mass or mixture, we can get this energy balance equation based on specific energies. We have this relation between heat and energy, so we can calculate the specific energy for a specific productive T10. In this case, the energy split factor is calculated by the energy consumed, specific energy consumed by one component in mixture divided by the specific energy of component to yield the same productive in the single grinding. Yeah, from this table shows the measured and calculated specific energy of mixtures. So the measured one is similar to the calculated one. So this energy balance is established. So we can do the next one to calculate the energy split factors. Just as shown in this table, we found that mixed proportions do not have obvious on the energy split, and together with the single breakage code split less, the energy split factor is less than 1. So it splits less specific energy and have a higher energy efficiency in the mixture quantity. At the end, I show you the conclusions. First, Dura mill and the ball and grist mill show the same energy efficiency based on the modified working model with the addition of particle size, but energy efficiency over breakage event in Dura mill is higher because the difference is in breakage event that particles handled in 40 unit time. Second, accident of coal is modeled into breakage model, and the calculation of ground energy efficiency of coal reveals properties is adaptive. Finally, we found that the specific energy consumed by coal of 25% ash is about 20% lower than that of coal in 45% to yield the same productive T10. The last one is energy split factors of components in heterogeneous surrounding is determined based on energy balance and modified breakage model. Energy split by coal increases with time and counter-shows an opposite trend. Compared with the single breakage soft material, namely soft material of calcite, in binary mixture consumed more energy. So this is the end. Thanks for your attention. Thank you.
Anything else, please? The presentation is good. Which is the red line is the laser pointer?
The pointer is the ball in the middle. This is, that's the pointer is there, and this is right, this is forward, and this is back.
Okay.
Up there. That one's
Thank you for the invitation. My name is Filippo De Grosso. I'm a PhD candidate at the Free University of Bolzano in South Tirol, Italy. We are a rather small university. Bolzano itself is not a big city in Italy. Its most famous citizen is actually a mummy, 8,000 years old, with the wise man. And but the idea is that we are a very promising market for energy, especially South Tirol, because of the surplus, electricity surplus that we have in the area. We are a net electricity exporter, and at the same time, the many projects about energy efficiency that are taking place in the area. In particular, this paper is framed within a collaboration network with the local utility area, and we are actually working on an expanded version, the biggest one. So very quickly, my agenda, we will focus on what is going on in Italy in terms of market zones and trends, going back to transmission capacity, and we will try to highlight some electricity forecasting approaches, a quick literature review, and then we will go to our paper with elements of novelty, data, and methodology and business. So Italy is a zonal market, which means it is divided into 6 market zones that are given by constraints in electricity transmission capacity. There are trends that are going on since years. Essentially, we see that before we had electricity flows pouring from north to south, while currently there is a reverse trend, which means that we somehow found our California back in the southern, down in the southern regions because of the impact of renewables, namely solar generation and wind power. There are other several trends. There is a big shading effect taking place because of a potential collusion of thermal producers. Essentially, they are not able to recover their fall generation costs, so they are moving from the peak time, which is covered essentially by renewables, to off-peak hours. And there is the so-called DAC curve. DAC curve, which is essentially the silhouette of the load pattern that you see on daily basis. Essentially, what happens is there is an injection of renewables that is actually moving the peak towards the evening hours, while the main day hours are covered by solar generation. So what's going on in terms of transmission capacity? There is much going on, actually. First, we have market coupling with 3 bordering countries, France, Austria, and Slovenia. That is market coupling in terms of power exchange algorithms. There is much debottlenecking going on with the islands, Sardinia, and Sicily, and on the Apennine regions here. Much work. At the same time, they are building some new interconnection between Savoie and Piedmont here. There is a new submarine cable being built between Italy and Montenegro. Italy is also connected with Malta, it's connected with Greece. There is a planned cable between Italy and Tunisia, thanks also to this German project, the Desertec, which was envisioning something like 16 terawatt of capacity of solar generation in the southern Mediterranean shores, so Algeria, Tunisia, and so on, but that is definitely in the long run. And there is a lot of merchant transmission being built. So merchant interconnectors essentially enjoy the so-called third-party exemption, which means that the capacity is not allocated by competitive bidding, but via commercial bidding. Forecasting approach. This is a paper about the forecasting. There is a lot of literature about it. As a rule of thumb, we can distinguish 5 possible approaches, as was highlighted by Rafa and Veron in 2014 literature review. There are multi-agent models that are essentially more about market equilibrium. So, for instance, power generator A versus power generator B, how they do collude or compete on the market. in terms of offers, in terms of market balancing, demand, supply, and so on. There are fundamental models which essentially takes into consideration the input factors. Can be fuel, can be dark spread, can be spark spread, can be weather forecast. There are reduced form models, essentially taking into consideration more what happens at the trading floor level, which means derivatives pricing, risk management measures, and so on. There are statistical approaches, more fragmentist, essentially that is about the time series data handling techniques. This is my case. And there is a new branch of studies based on computational intelligence, which is mainly about some engineering realm, which means neural networks, fuzzy logics. They try essentially to replicate how the electricity transmission works with some complex schemes. There is an hybridization of all these models, which means that we do not simply stick to one specific case, but you take advantage of several tools that you have, such as this case. My paper will be, for instance, a statistical approach plus some fundamental models. A very quick literature review. This is just essentially to show that there is an increasing level of sophistication. The literature is quite vast. We are focusing more on renewables deployment. We are focusing on most mature and promising markets, such as, for instance, the Nord Pool, where we have a lot of impact from wind generation, which is actually triggering the prices down. And that's something that we are taking into consideration. And at the same time, the models are getting more and more hybrid. Those are international markets. This is a literature review for the Italian market. In Italy, we are taking into consideration more the issues regarding transmission, congestion, the impact of renewables. Those are more or less what is taking place. We have a lot of thermal generation capacities, and namely they are turbo gas power plants, but they have now a big issue with the utilization factor because essentially they are being replaced by renewables that are less expensive. Elements of novelty of this paper. First of all, the thing is that there is a debate whether electricity prices are stationary, time series, or not. Some features of the time series, the stationary time series, will be seasonality, intraday, weekly, volatility clustering, mean reversion, so the prices tend to stabilize on a medium average. It could be, for the Italian case, 40, 50 euros per megawatt. There are spikes to be considered. So when you input bids in the Italian power exchange, you can put bids between 0 and 3,000. For instance, in other markets, such as the German one, you can input also negative values. So that is not the case here. But of course, this triggers some spikes, high variability in the time series. And there is a leverage effect, actually a reverse leverage effect, which means that usually negative shocks have a bigger impact compared to positive shocks. That is the so-called asymmetry. What we are trying to do with this paper is to do something new by using very, let's say, very previously used tools. So we are taking into consideration the regional dimension, so we do not focus on the whole market, on the whole Italian market, but only on one specific market zone, which is the North zone. We are modeling our hourly data and not the daily data. We are taking into consideration congestion effects in the transmission grid and import capacity flows. We are taking into consideration intermittent renewables. And we rely, as I said before, on hybrid approaches. So, our data. We have quite a rich data set, luckily. So, we have 3 years of data spanning from 2015 to 2017.
up to 26,000 more observation, hourly observation. And essentially, we are taking into consideration several variables. So here, when you read PUN stands for Prezzo Unico Nazionale, which is essentially the settlement price, which is given by a weighted average of the several zonal prices. We want to forecast the north price here, and we are taking also into consideration the bordering market zone, which is the central north Italian zone. We are not taking into consideration southern regions because the electricity flows are already discounted by the passage across the central area. So there are, of course, internal flows. We have some meteorological data. We have the generation, and we have fuel inputs. So future from Brent, coal, future. Building on what you said, Jim, I agree on that. We take into consideration, it's better to take into consideration actual variables compared to forecast. But the idea, I use several forecasts. The idea is that they want something that the potential trader can use. So actually they have, given this is a day-ahead market, so we are inputting our variables 24 hours before. There are several forecasts that we can potentially use that are publicly available data, especially from the Enso Transparency platform, which is a quite a rich database. That we are
I consider futures prices real data. Futures prices are real.
It's true. And so our methodology, so we are doing point forecast, not interval forecast. We have divided our 3 years in 2 years, one sample, and 1 year control sample. We are using the rolling window approach, and we did some, let's say, sensitivity. So the first one is a very naive approach. It's a random walk. We just want to see how it performs compared to actual values. We use an ARMA, autoregressive moving average, and we inputted a 4-2. 4-2 are the legs. So 4 legs for the autoregressive component, 2 legs for the moving average component. We use also the generalized autoregressive conditional elasticity model, which is essentially an ARMA with this behavior in terms given in the error. Usually the standard form is a gauge 1-1. And then we have a more complex model, which is an ARMAX, is an autoregressive moving average with exogenous variables, which are these data that we see here. Essentially, we did some sensitivity with the selection. And this is an example of an equation. Of course, we added some dummies to check and to control for seasonality. So we have a dummy for month, and we have a dummy for weekends and holidays. We are planning to introduce some other dummies in the next month. Those are the results. We calculated the root mean square errors, which are quite useful because they still keep the same unit of measure, which means that we can compare them from a trading floor perspective to actual prices. So those results are quite interesting from an economic point of view, are quite dreadful from a trading floor perspective, because those errors are pretty high. And you see essentially there is quite small errors in terms of peak hours. When there is the ramp up of coal-fired plants, there is an increasing volatility that is difficult to capture, then a decrease, and another increase. What is interesting is that we experienced that the more parsimonious approach is better off. In fact, this green line is the new ARMAX, which is a richer one. So we introduce more explicatory variables, but it underperforms. So that was quite interesting as well. The trend is you see more or less the same. With the next model, we expect it to increase substantially those are like measures. We also, here we have some coefficients. Usually they are not that relevant to show. Usually you present data in terms of a square significance level. But what I wanted to show here is that there is a compensation effect, especially among the commodities, that is we try to capture. So essentially we were using less coal, because it was less relevant in terms of significance, was partially compensated by gas, same trend here with the Brent. So there is a kind of opportunistic approach for thermal generation, apparently, in order to compensate the fluctuation of prices. While when we consider the coefficients for wind and for solar, so the intermittent renewables, that what we have here is higher volatility. Here we took into consideration some specific benchmark hours. So this is night hours at 3 o'clock. So this is the 9 in the morning. This is the peak hour, the afternoon peak. This is the evening. So the more sensible hours that we can potentially take into consideration. And going back, going to conclusions. So from a trading day ahead perspective, those results are not completely satisfactory. So we are actually fine-tuning our model. So we believe that we will be able to increase error measures. There is, of course, increased volatility when you input intermittent renewables. So we have to consider how to model the lesson, because maybe we have not done that. We have not done it in a very efficient way. As I said before, more parsimonial approaches usually pay off. We also find that the general persistence of short memory and the reliance on market operator on time and information to take trading decision, which means that we have to decide exactly how to model our legs, because currently we have really short legs. There is maybe the possibility to move more in the past, but this is not what a potential trader would do. What a potential trader would do is most likely to look at what happened yesterday or the day before, and then arrange your bidding decision according to the market sentiment and according to the things regarding the day. And as I said before, we are working on a more complex model. We will be fine-tuning that. We will include CO2 emission. So essentially, we have a European emission allowances. So we will take that into consideration. Italy is a net importer of electricity, but sometimes it is also an exporter, especially nowadays when there is a shutting down of French nuclear capacity. So it happens. Actually, Italy is exporting from France. And we are including the marginal technology. This is a peculiar metric that is published by the market operator, Gestore dei Mercati Energetici. Essentially gives you a qualitative measure of who is the generation technology that is setting the price. You want to take that into consideration, maybe adding a numerical value and see whether it can behave and it can increase our precision by adding it as a discrete value. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
So please, I ask the regulators to come to the desk for some questions, please. There are any questions? Yes, please.
I have a question on the so did I understand it correctly that the proposal is $20 per kilogram CO2 emissions?
No. $20 per metric ton of CO2 emissions, not per kilogram.
Then my question is, why did you decide to choose 20?
I wanted to, I'm interested in other numbers, but I was I was surprised, and I started out with 40 because that's what usually is mentioned as sort of a beginning tax. But the estimates that I was getting, you know, were such big changes that I thought it was more interesting to show that even a smaller carbon tax, by these numbers anyway, could be quite effective. And I was surprised also to see that if introduced slightly gradually, it could actually have a bigger effect, which is counterintuitive. But that's what it looks like. But I don't know, maybe probably just because it's a round number for several years. I heard this back in 2013, but it hasn't changed. I mean, there are no global carbon taxes, obviously. It's an interesting question about how carbon taxes could be globalized. And there's an American economist who I think should one day get the Nobel named Bill Nordhaus at Yale, who has a proposal about that. And it is basically that the rich countries and the countries that want to do carbon taxing, they impose carbon tariffs, not for the purposes that are usually, you know, people impose tariffs, but they impose tariffs on any country, on the imports from any country that does not have carbon taxes. So in effect, it's impose carbon taxes or we will impose them on you. Okay, that's the idea. And this can be combined, and this is what most people don't think about. This can be combined with different levels of impact on different countries, because there can be lump sum or all at once transfers. So, you know, the basic argument is, why should China pay as much on carbon taxes if, you know, if the rich countries have been pumping carbon for 200 years, and only now that China starts to get rich, we start to tax, you know, which they shouldn't. The idea is they shouldn't be taxed at the same rate. The economist's answer, and this is a very standard answer, yes, they should be taxed at the same rate per unit of carbon, but there can be transfers. There can be transfers back to China, so-called lump sum, and to India and other countries that will mean that the overall impact will be less, but you'll have the same impact on carbon. The income impact will be
So you're gonna give them money.
You give them money, basically. Yeah. But it's a lump sum. It's not, you decided at the beginning of the program, basically, how much you're gonna give them. But you still tax them per unit of carbon. So it's called a lump sum because it doesn't vary with the carbon.
So I will follow L's question, and you charge $20 for carbon tax, and you shut down the coal mine, you kill the coal, you kill the China.
No, I mean,
because in Chinese primary energy structure,
yeah,
there are 75% of the energy from coal. And I said yesterday, this may be cannot be changed from this year to 10 or 20 years or 30 years later. And I don't know, your data is from the United States?
it's totally United States data. Totally
United States.
Yeah, yeah.
So the values in China, even though the increased rate of the coal basis, but the total amount will also increase 3.5 billion metric ton. So very huge the number. Also, we want to use gas, we want to use petroleum, we want to use renewable energy, but the deposit is like this. So, up to, you should help us. Of course, I make a joke.
No.
In fact, maybe our ability, and we have a lot of business to do, because they will improve the co-efficiency, energy efficiency, and will use the cleaner coal. But the carbon tax really improves Chinese energy structure.
Right.
This is the
People talk about carbon sequestration and capture. Of course, the energy rich and carbon rich countries talk about it the most. And China has probably more coal than anyone.
Yes,
in the world.
the carbon tax is the way. But I think for this huge amount of the coal, China cannot be.
You know, I mean, there's different things you could do. I mean, first of all, you could make the tax lower, so that it would happen more slowly. Or, you know, it's possible that you could, you know, because it's more pain on China gets bigger transfers so that it can redeploy more coal miners, you know, and retrain them to do other things, so it can give more subsidies to solar or gas, whatever. I think as a point of efficiency, the overall tax level should be the same on a global basis. But I'm sympathetic. It's why I mentioned it. I'm sympathetic to the idea that different countries have different starting points. India gets most of its electricity from coal as well. So they're in a hard place. And so the rich countries should take that into account. I think they should help them. We have different resource levels and different levels of historic responsibility for what happens, and that can be argued over, I think.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I have a question to Filippo to the last presentation. So I think it was really a very nice presentation. Thank you very much. Did you also consider or think about modeling different types of market coupling and market splitting? Because, for example, as you may know, currently Austria, Germany, which is actually a perfect joint market, they are splitting up the market, at least to some extent. And also in other countries, for example, at the Iberian Peninsula, Spain, Portugal, and Sweden, there are sometimes such market splitting effects. Is that also to some part?
We would like to. We didn't do that yet. We would like to add it. The thing is that it's difficult to understand in terms of algorithms. So what we should model in terms of time series and data data. Because usually, okay, we have the mechanism of price formation.
Yeah.
We would just like to understand what we should add for Slovenia, France, and Austria, which with whom we have actually a market coupling. We are still thinking about it, but we don't know yet. What we are currently doing is that we are inputting the physical flows, and in import and in export, there is also, we were also considering the net transfer capacity, which is a forecast, it is planned, and it could be a proxy also for market coupling. But the way to take into consideration market coupling is something that we would like to understand. It's interesting, for sure it has an impact, has an effect, because all the flows are actually passing through the northern border. So it makes perfect sense to include that variable as well. But we are struggling a little bit to understand.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I thought of one other thing to say, and I'm sure you know this, because you're a highly sophisticated person. But there's a demand for more pollution control among the Chinese public, especially among the urban middle class. So I know from Americans, I know, live in Shanghai, Beijing. If you ask, what's the biggest problem you face? What's the worst thing about that's what they'll say, especially if they have children. And of course, the Chinese feel the same, I'm sure. Children too. Yeah. The Chinese. I was astonished when I was the last time I was China Daily published a study. I don't know if it's in press because I don't read China, but they published this result that the amount of extra deaths from pollution, not in all of China, but just in the northeast of China, which is the most coal-rich, industrial-rich, was on the order of, I don't know, 100,000, 200,000 a single year extra death. People did not have died. And, so that's, I'm sure if you looked at the whole country and
That's all. Yeah, what I'm doing, like,